The concept of yin and yang is considered the Tao, and the way of heaven has its track in the lives of the people, right? The actions of the masses reflect yin and yang. There should have been a thinker at the time to advocate for this heavenly way, to articulate it, and lead our nation towards a bright future. Anyway, this was during the first 30 years of reform and opening up. What was the highest achievement in terms of opening up at that time? We joined the WTO in 2001. This was a significant event, wasn't it? The World Trade Organization is not easy to get into. You need to negotiate with each member country, and every existing member country must accept you before you can join. So, what was negotiated? Two things: first, that we were a qualified market economy country, and second, that we continuously proved that we were a developing country, not a developed country. Why is this point also important? By joining the WTO as a developing country, we would enjoy the most favored nation treatment. Let's not forget this history. After joining in 2001, what economic achievements did China reach in the subsequent 20 years? China surpassed Japan to become the world's second-largest economy. Americans must face this issue because, with our entry into the WTO, the U.S. market had to open up to Chinese manufacturing, right? China became the world's largest factory. Of course, we paid a price for it, which was a plethora of cheap labor, and what was the second cost? Natural resources and the environment. Since we were the factory, energy consumption and ecological destruction were the costs. But what did this bring? It brought about the rise of the world's second-largest economy. We progressed. Americans even discussed a question: if we Americans didn't use Chinese-made products, made in China, for 3 months, could we survive? The conclusion was that they could not survive without it. It shows how Chinese manufacturing is everywhere in the American market. I have never lived in the U.S., but my sister has been living there since 1986, and she's still there to this day. So, to help the family, every time she returns to China for a visit, she buys some American brands to give to me, right? That TV set, that video recorder you've heard of, right? Nowadays they are not used anymore, but at the time, she gave them to me. I looked at them and saw, made in China. I told her she just brought Chinese-made products back to me. But many things I bought in America, those items, were made in China. American brands, world brands, and we won't repeat that here. These are moments in history we should not forget, as they have brought such tremendous achievements to China's economic development, capturing global attention. There is no denying it. And then, the Chinese people became wealthy. The whole world came to know about the Chinese middle class. The Chinese middle class does not make up a high proportion of China's population, but is China's population large? It is. Within such a large population base, even though the proportion of the middle class is not high, is the absolute number significant? It is. They possess the world's most vigorous purchasing power. When they travel to various countries in Europe, one of the main purposes is shopping for world-famous brands and labels. There is a Galeries Lafayette in Paris, which I have also visited. I wasn't there to shop, I didn't have the money, but I was part of those tour group you know about, the ones organized by the official travel agency. There was an itinerary that included a visit to the Louvre, which I thought was nice. However, the Louvre visit was scheduled for 5 p.m., so what were we doing during the day? Visiting Galeries Lafayette. We were all strangers in the tour group, brought together by the travel agency. After a few days, we became quite familiar with each other, and they said to me, "Professor Wang, since you're with us, why not look around and maybe buy something?" I told them I only had so much money in my pocket and that they should continue shopping while I waited outside and smoked, from 9 a.m. until almost 4:30 p.m. I finally walked through Galeries Lafayette and, I didn't recognize a single brand. They had to explain to me what each brand meant, and I was completely ignorant in this realm of world-famous brands. Later, they asked why I wasn't interested in anything, and I realized there were so many things I didn't need. They all went with empty suitcases and came back with them full. Because of the significant price difference for the same brands. Later, I felt quite upset, I had to vent. Finally, at 5 p.m., we reached the Louvre. They closed at 6:30 p.m., so how much could I see? It would take a whole day or even weeks to see everything. After coming out at 6:30 p.m. and boarding the bus, everyone was seated, and I saw that they were all happy, having bought what they wanted. So, I became unhappy and started to speak up in the bus. My friends, do you know about the opium wars? They all did. I explained that the trade between China and Britain used to be in our favor, with them in deficit, because Chinese porcelain and silk were luxury goods in Europe at that time. So they bought them, and that led to their deficit and our surplus. Then they found a commodity called opium, got the Chinese addicted first, and then sold opium in vast quantities to China. This harmed the health of the Chinese people and devastated China's treasury. Silver flowed towards Britain. Eventually, Emperor Daoguang had to start an anti-opium campaign and sent Lin Zexu to deal with it. I said that during the Opium Wars, our silver flowed to Europe through the consumption of opium. Today, our silver is flowing back to Europe through the consumption of foreign luxury goods. Isn't it the same thing? They agreed it was. The only difference I mentioned was that the luxury goods they bought would not affect their health, unlike opium, but otherwise, it was much the same. Has it been easy for us to go through decades of reform and opening up? The money in everyone's pockets is the hard-earned sweat of ordinary people, those migrant workers who left their hometowns to work in coastal cities. Manufacturing enterprises are incredible, working so many hours a day, producing goods to sell overseas, and then the money comes in. The money has reached your pockets, right? To be realistic, you are the newly emerged bourgeoisie. They agreed. And then I asked, where does your money go? It flows back to Europe. Couldn't you invest your money in developing China's own brands instead of going to Galeries Lafayette? They all agreed, but the next day they went shopping happily again because there was still a suitcase that wasn't full. I am telling the truth, they really like what I say, they feel quite happy after listening, and then they continue to do what they had originally planned to do. That's how things are. In the 30 years of China's reform and opening up, from 1979 to 2009, China's economic achievements were significant, but so were the costs. What was the approach to development? I'll write it on the whiteboard because it might be quite provocative, and those who disagree can stand up and refute me. In the first 30 years of China's reform and opening up, our primary way of developing the economy, I'll use this simple diagram to explain. Power and capital are at the top, society is at the bottom. With this diagram, I'll say this: our way of developing the economy was the joint plunder of social resources by power and capital. As soon as I say this, I guess I'll encounter opposition. The first half of this statement, the alliance between power and capital, cannot be refuted. It's a public fact, who can deny it? The key part of the statement is the verb used in the second half, plunder. I say plunder, and you would oppose it. You agree with the alliance of power and capital. I now highlight the verb plunder, and if you change this word to develop, wouldn't that be correct? The joint development of social resources by power and capital, wouldn't that be right? Now, the focal point of the debate with the opposing view is on one word: is it plunder or development? If it is the development of social resources, what does it mean? Every time you take a portion of social resources, you simultaneously assume the corresponding social responsibility, this is called development. Including the use of university students as a talent resource, right? You also taking responsibility for the students' livelihoods. You develop real estate, right? You have developed the residential area, and you are assuming the corresponding responsibilities for the residents who will live there in the future, right? You have to do many things. If you take social resources and leave without assuming any social responsibility, I can only say it is plunder. If you take social resources and, at the same time, assume the corresponding social responsibility that comes with these resources, and you fulfill it well, what does it lead to? Healthy, normal social development. If you take social resources and go without taking any corresponding social responsibility, it leads to social regression and disintegration. So, is it development or plunder? We should not just argue verbally, but look at the objective reality. What is the actual state of our society? Is it developing in a healthy and normal way, or is it regressing and on the verge of disintegration? Many things don't need to be listed one by one, right? Unfinished buildings are a very important issue, aren't they? And have you seen those shoddy construction projects? Is that assuming the corresponding social responsibility? That is plunder. I write power and capital above society on the whiteboard in front of you. This has two meanings. During the first 30 years of China's reform and opening up, there were two strong forces, power and capital, while society was the weaker party, always subjugated to the two stronger forces. That's why I placed society below them. There's another meaning. Society represents the people's livelihood, and the people's livelihood is like water, while power and capital are like two boats. The boats are on top of the water, right? The water is below the boats. This also has another meaning, which is included in this diagram. What do we Chinese often say? Water can carry a boat, but it can also capsize it. In the recent cycle of our national history, we have made significant accomplishments. We have essentially gotten rid of widespread poverty. Billions of people have enough food to fill their stomachs and clothes to wear, not having to share a pair of pants among several people, right? This is already a great progress and a contribution to the entire humanity, as we have essentially overcome poverty and hunger. The significant economic achievements that have garnered global attention come at a substantial price. This cost can be observed in two main aspects. Firstly, in contemporary Chinese society, neither the successful or the less successful groups experience a sense of life satisfaction. No social stratum has discovered a space for inner peace and stability, and the entire nation is devoid of a spiritual sanctuary. We have transitioned from an era of gaps between supply and demand to an era marked by gaps in spiritual satisfaction, which represents the first consequence. Secondly, as a whole, today's Chinese society suffers from a lack of social justice. These two basic facts are in front of us. Of course, I always hope to say that we are still in a golden age, a prosperous and thriving era, and I also hope to express our era in this way. But when we look at the real things, the two basic aspects we face, the money in our pockets is more than before. Our generation, which once had a memory of hunger, is not hungry now. We don't starve, and that's remarkable. But we also feel spiritually unanchored. Today, most Chinese people are restless and lack a sense of belonging. Secondly, there is a lack of social justice. To what extent? The most basic trust between people has disappeared, and that's what we are facing. If other nations in the world knew that there is a nationality called the Chinese, and they openly discussed a topic on their television stations, debating whether or not one should help an elderly person who has fallen on the street, they would be very surprised. Is this even a question? In today's China, this is indeed a real question, very practical. I, Wang Defeng, have thought about it. In my imagination, if one day I am walking on the street and an elderly person falls down in front of me, I ask myself, Wang Defeng, to help or not to help? I think it over and I must help, but before helping, I must do one thing. Take out my phone. This wasn't caused by me. Take a picture, and it would be best to have passers-by as my witnesses. You confirm it, then I start to help. Today in Chinese society, one cannot predict the behavior of others because there are too many actions that break moral boundaries.